Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari. This is Great Big History Podcast. Yeah, Great Big History Podcast. And in this episode, we do Imperialism, where Europe takes over the world. When we started, our question was, who's going to take over the world? And the answer is white Europeans. Surprise. And this is the process. So what is it? What is imperialism? It is a period of time where the extension of the nation's military and political control over faraway people, especially those of different ethnic, religious, and racial heritage, mostly to extract economic resources. This is different from colonialism, where Europeans actually went and lived. And this is different than the expansion or unification of, like, say, France or Germany. Now, we can talk about the building of empires, and we can talk about imperial ambitions, but the concept of imperialism as a big I, as a noun, as what happens between 1850 and 1915, 1920, is that the Europeans leave Europe and conquer the rest of the world. They conquer black, brown, yellow people and take their stuff, especially their resources. Between 1800 and 1920, Europeans or their colonials will take over 85% of the world. Thailand, Ethiopia, China remained quote-unquote independent. But they're not. They're just not directly controlled by Europeans. But they're not free to do whatever they want either. Why does this happen? Well, the Napoleonic Wars were so destructive, where Europeans fought each other, they were so destructive that basically the idea was Europeans shouldn't fight. It was too destructive. The French Revolution plus Napoleonic Wars meant there should be a balance in Europe, and hey, we could kill other people, but basically white people shouldn't fight each other. When white people fight each other, bad stuff happens. And when we get to part 2 of this class, white people are going to fight each other and bad stuff is going to happen. So Metternich was correct. Conservatism must win. The understanding of the French Revolution was change, liberals, progressives, all that change got out of hand and created chaos. And so conservatives are like, we're not changing. Or if we have to change, we're changing very slow. This is Edmund Burke. This is the beginning of modern conservatism as a philosophy. Because conservatism was the philosophy of life until basically the French Revolution. Because people didn't know you could actually just overthrow everything. And you may go, well, what about America? Well, America just did a Lockean revolution of our Lockean people reasserting Lockean ideals. Like, it wasn't that big of a change. They were British people in a British system. They continue to be British people in a British system. They just got rid of a king and called it a president. Okay. So conservatism is the name of the game of Europe of the 19th century. And this is known as Metternich's diplomacy. This is the Austrian diplomat Metternich, Metternich, and his idea is no change. When liberals get all crazy, we put them down. We help each other. These kings, we three kings, we got to work together. Man, we're in a club and we can't let all these liberal Democrats kind of try to take over, because that's going to just destroy everything. Second was Darwin. Now, not Darwin himself, but Darwin's ideas. Now, Darwin comes up with this idea of survival of the fittest. What he means is adaptation. When he looks at the beaks of the birds, he's talking about adaptation. Not survival of the toughest, not survival of the smartest, survival of those who adapt to their environment. He does not apply his philosophy to people. He very specifically says he's not applying it to people. People after Darwin dies will apply it to people, and that's called social Darwinism. And that's the idea that the fittest means the toughest, means the most violent, means those who act. Nietzsche's will to power, it's conquest, wealth, education. The idea that those who fall behind go under. That might makes right. Because if you win, you're the fittest. That the world is divided into winners and losers. And if you don't want to be a loser, you better be a winner. That's not Darwin. That's social Darwinism. That's philosophers later who were rich, who were strong, who were white, and justified the violence against other people and the taking of their stuff. 3. Industrialization. We just talked about industrialization, and industrialization requires to make all of that stuff a massive natural resources. Because you're not making 5 shirts a day anymore. You're making 5,000 a day. So now all of a sudden, your need for timber, for cloth, for minerals, for fabrics, for energy is enormous. Massive natural resources. Way more than your local area can provide. So you have to suck. Industrialization is going to force the sucking in of all of these resources. First from the neighboring counties, then from the neighboring countryside, then from wherever it can get it. This constant pulling in of massive amounts of natural resources. Well, where are you going to get it? And if you don't get it, what happens to those factories? They slow down. People lose money. People go unemployed. Then they get upset. And then you have revolutions, which Metternich's diplomacy was trying to prevent. So industrialization requires an unending supply of natural resources to turn into goods that can be sold. And number 4, there's new tech and medicine. Europeans can finally go into the interior of the continents. Steamships allow them to go upriver. Quinine allows them to not die from malaria in jungles. The repeater rifles and the machine gun mean easy conquests. You don't need to send 50,000 troops to Africa. You could send 3,000, and they could defeat an army of 50,000 with their machine guns. So your easy conquests, few losses. And at that point, nobody cares. Like Europeans don't mind. Oh, we conquered Sudan and nobody died? Then conquer Sudan. Why wouldn't we do that? What are the advantages? Advantages is Europe gets rich. This is why you conquer other people. You get rich. You get to take their stuff. Especially corporation owners. Workers will get better off, but it's the owners who now have the markets to sell to and the markets to buy from. Because you could now, once you own Sudan, you can lock the French out, the Germans out, the Italians out. And only the Sudanese can only sell their gold, their coal, their minerals to you. And they have to buy your manufactured goods at a monopolistic price. So corporate owners do well. Governments do well because as the economy rises, they get to tax more. Their taxes are worth more. 2, predictable supplies of materials equals industrial growth. And this is going to be capitalism. This is going to be a predicate part of capitalism. The economy must grow. People in the Middle Ages didn't care about the economy growing. It didn't grow. It grew at nothing. You worked 50 acres. You and your mule. 40 acres on a mule. You worked it till you died. Then your son worked it till he died. Then his son worked it till he died. You didn't suddenly get rich off of that. You didn't go, oh, I'm going to plant 5% more. No, there's no growth. With industrialization, now you have to make more. You have to sell more. You have to create more. That hadn't been true before for the vast majority of people. Now, the economy, taxes, workers, the workers' wages want to go up every year. They require growth. You get new markets to sell to. We kind of explained that. And that monopoly means wealth. The people had to buy from you. The spread of culture. You get world cultures, English spreads, French spreads. You get world languages. You get world religions. People who had never been Christian before suddenly now have to become Christian. We even get the spread of time and years. The world calls right now 2020. Why? Why? What does the rest of the world care about the birth date of a Christian God? Why? They have other days. Why do they care? Because Europeans showed up with guns and said, the year is 1785. And the people said, no, it's not. It's the year shut up. It's the year 1785. And the people said, okay, dude, calm down. All of this showed European superiority. So you could walk around. Like if we were to do world civilization class in 1898 in Cambridge, we would talk about how it would just be me. It probably wouldn't even be me. I'm probably too low class, but let's assume it's me. A couple of white dudes. And we talk about how we ran the world because women, black people, brown people, and yellow people all have to listen to us because we are obviously more superior, better adapted to the universe than they are. And maybe one day they'll be like us. But for now, we rule the world. And so it wouldn't be called world civilization class because we wouldn't care about world civilization. We call it something like Britain rules the world class. And we'd write papers. I would send you all off. Not you ladies, because, you wouldn't be getting higher education. And, okay, most of you wouldn't be in Cambridge either. But let's just pretend, right? I'd send you off to write a 10-page, 20-page paper about the best ways to rule the world. And that would be our final project. And we'd sit here and we'd smoke cigarettes and a cigar and have brandies while we had classes. And we'd talk about how we rule the world and why white people are so amazing. And that was education. That was history anyway. We would do that was modern history. We would do Rome and the Greeks. We would talk about how they ran the world and how we could learn from them. That's it. But the idea that we would have a class on the history of Islamic culture, please. Like, there may be some teacher that does that, but that would be so esoteric. It would be for the people who want to be Indiana Jones, who want to go off into the desert and like be a crazy desert-loving British guy. They were weird people. Our job is to run the world. What are the disadvantages? Oh, disadvantages with imperialism. Let's see. First, racism and social Darwinism. Meant basically white supremacy. A scientific natural racism. When you took the racism that already existed, you added to social Darwinism, suddenly you got essentially fascism. Now, we're not yet there to fascism, but this is where fascism will gain its philosophical underpinnings, what Nietzsche will discuss. Is Nietzsche a fascist? No. And yeah. And this is the idea that white people are better, scientifically, biologically better, to run the world. Second is stealing, looting, raping, pillaging of the natural world and the non-European peoples. The mass murder of people. The Belgian Congo is essentially 30 years of a massive human rights atrocity, all for rubber. They cut the hands off the workers if they didn't work fast enough. So there's terrorism, all for plunder. The cutting down of forests, the mushing of people together, the genocide of other peoples. Like, the disadvantage is the untold, and I mean untold, like these histories are not written. destruction of the human and natural world by the Europeans. And finally, the breakup of natural internal trade connections, the mushing of peoples together who hadn't lived together, and the breaking apart of peoples who did live together. See, when the Europeans show up, there's already all these networks. Part of the racism of European history, of imperialism, is it's the Puritans in the New World. When we showed up, there was nothing here. No, there wasn't. There's 1,000 years of African history. All these people had histories. White people didn't care about them, and so they leveled them. They took people and smushed them together because now this is part of France. And people who you used to live with, well, they're in the British part, so now you can't live with them anymore. It made no sense. It still makes no sense. The modern countries of Africa don't make sense because they were made not by Africans, not by natural history, not by cultural history. They were made by European imperial history. Europeans drew lines, sometimes literally on maps, and just created boundaries and said, this is mine, that's yours. Whether or not the people in there had any relationship with each other or not. And a lot of times, how do you control this? You empower minorities with violence. Why? Why would you empower minorities? Well, because of the way war worked. Before guns, the more people you had, the larger your population meant the more soldiers you had, which meant in most battles, you got the win. Sure, could some society like the Songhai in Sahel Africa be more efficient than other people, even if they had less people? Yes. And could they win from time to time? Yes. But usually not. Usually, in a world of hand-to-hand combat, the more people you have, the more likely you are to win. Which meant in most of these societies, the minority, the ethnic minority, was oppressed by the majority in their relationships. And we see this time and time and time again, right? The Babylonians oppressed the small cities near them. Tough. Babylon was bigger, so it beat up the people around them that were smaller. Well, here come the British. Here come the French. Here come Germans. Here come Americans. And they show up and they want to run the country. Whatever, they build it on a map. They want to run this. But now you have to do it on the ground. You have to get the people in that territory of the map to agree in some way, shape, or form that you get to run the place. Because ultimately, you could shoot a lot of people. You can't shoot everybody. Like, you still need them to work for you. And so, the idea was, you go to the minorities. And you say, dear chap, you've been oppressed for 1,000 years. Yeah, I have been oppressed. This is terrible. Well, how about I give you these machine guns, and then you, with me, will shoot the majority people who've been oppressing you for 1,000 years. Oh, that would be great. I would love that. Can I have the gun right now? Well, hold on. You gotta agree that we get to make the rules. And the rules mean we get to tell you what to do, but it'll be okay. The rules will be worse on the other people. And you gotta help us. Like, run the place, and we get to take the stuff in the ground. Do I get my guns? Oh, you get a lot of guns. You get an unending amount of guns if you help us. Where do I sign? And that's exactly what happens. So in Iraq, the Sunnis are empowered to oppress the Shia. In Syria, the Shia are empowered to oppress the Sunnis, who are the majority. Throughout all of Africa, minorities, the Hutus are the Tutsis are given weapons to oppress the Tutsi. The Tutsis are given weapons to oppress the Hutus because the Hutus outnumbered them. And so it's this Roman divide and conquer. You help the minority because the minority will be oppressed without you. And so they're willing to work with an outside foreigner to let the outside foreigner run the show because their lives get better. What happens is these territories get poorer because their resources are being extracted for European wealth. They become more socially divided because now the minority is oppressing the majority, which makes the majority mad because they're the majority. They can count. They know it's the foreigner keeping the minority in power. And most importantly, these places are being tied not to each other, not to their neighbors, but to Europe. They're tied politically, they're tied economically to what happens in Europe, to the economics in Europe. That means all of those alliances, all of those social, all of those marriages, all of that business, all of those trade that have been set up over 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years are broken. All those ties are broken and redirected by Europeans for Europeans. The largest trading partner of the tribes of Nigeria are not the people next to Nigeria, to their neighbors. It's to London. That makes no sense. That's not natural. That's not the way economics works in any kind of natural system. And yet, this is what the Europeans do with imperialism. They redirect the political and economic ties of Africa, of India, of China, of the world to them. In our next episode, we're going to talk about a bunch of events from India to China to Japan that highlight imperialism. Thank you.